Yeah.
And the soundstage came equipped with this big round rotating platform in the middle of the soundstage, so that got Eric Bischoff to thinking, well, if you put a ring on this big rotating platform and have it slowly turning during the matches, the audience's perspective would constantly be changing, which added a nice little element to the production.
Yeah, just kind of like the restaurant in the land.
Yes, exactly. That's it. It is like a rotating restaurant.
It's a rotating restaurant.
Wow.
And by the way, the soundstage that we're talking about here was located in the building that currently houses Toy Story Mania over at Disney Hollywood Studios.
Way.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's so cool.
That's all Mania, brother.
Yeah.
Right.
The entrance was located where the old entrance to Toy Story Mania was,
in
which
the back.
is across from the new Toy Story Mania.
That's so crazy to think that could have been what it was and now what it is.
Yeah, so you're watching Toy Story Mania, Sting could have slammed Vader right there.
Right there.
That's when history.
Yeah.
You could have been standing where Sting's blood was one day.
Yes.
Somebody won a belt right there when we went on the ride.
Oh, that's right.
That's crazy.
That's awesome, actually.
That's crazy. You think of it like that. Like, dang.
You're like concentrating how many points you're getting. You didn't realize Ric Flair won his 14th championship right there.
Ooh-wee.
Probably not. It was kind of the B-level shows at the time. But from WCW's perspective, shooting at Disney gave WCW lower costs, better production value, a more enthusiastic crowd. And then when you've got that flyover of Disney's MGM Studios in the opening, that's enough for advertisers and potential sponsors to say, hey, if these guys are good enough for Disney, maybe WCW is something we ought to be looking at and getting behind.
You're right, because when they would start those shows, it would just show a bunch of people flocking to the building.
You would see the Eiffel Tower. You would see all of it. Yes. So now we know why WCW would want to pair with Disney, want to shoot at Disney. So naturally, we have to ask ourselves, what?
Okay, well, how do you keep everybody interested?
No. Why would Disney want pro wrestling in their theme park?
Because it's awesome.
For boys.
Well, but it doesn't exactly fit the Disney brand, though.
Well, that's fair, but it is
I like
awesome.
what Kirk said, for boys.
For boys.
Because Michael Eisner wants to stick it to Millionaire Ted.
No, it doesn't. But okay, but wrestling does have the sense of storytelling. I could be wrong with this, but it has a sense of storytelling. It allows you to still put the Disney brand out there, right? I mean, I don't know.
I'm disappointed in you guys. I really, because if y'all were paying attention, y'all would realize, as I pointed out before, Disney had a bunch of empty sound stages just sitting there collecting dust.
So they got extra money.
Yeah.
Right.
They got extra that made it a viable studio.
Right.
Hey.
So Disney made good money by charging WCW for the privilege of recording on their soundstage.
I was trying to have imagination. I forgot to go back to business. What's best for business?
Okay.
Business.
And this is a business company.
Absolutely, got it.
But there's a second reason as well.
A second reason for that.
Yes.
Okay.
Disney needed quote unquote real television productions to film on their lot to provide that working studio feel that they were supposed to be going for. Because that's what MGM Studios, it was supposed to be like, yeah, come over here and you'll never know what you're going to find. We're going to be filming this. We're going to be making that. This is what it was to go to the MGM Studios. That was part of the promise, is that you might show up and you'd see Bette Midler filming a movie right there on the streets of America. So any of us that went to WCW, anyone of us that went to MGM Studios in the early 90s know that there weren't very many opening day attractions for guests to experience.
Not a lot.
Right?
It's pretty dead.
Very limited, yes.
Even Muppet Vision 3D opened up years after, not multiple years, but 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, the tour animation courtyard.
So, yeah, Disney did need the added entertainment of a live wrestling show just to give guests something else to do when 3 o'clock rolled around and they're like, okay, we've seen everything there is to see. It was very much a half-day park.
Very much.
Yes.
And of course, Disney being Disney, and this is still a model they follow with Disney Springs, this additional entertainment for the guests came at absolutely no cost to the Walt Disney Company because WCW is paying to be there.
Oh, that's genius.
Yes. Now, just because Disney was willing to take WCW's money, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have any concerns with having wrestling in their theme park.
With the product. Okay. So they didn't watch the product? Literally, we just had a conversation. I'm sorry, so I just want to say Carousel of Progress, as explained to us by Kevin, dictates that Grandma was watching wrestling back in the day. How do they not associate and say, "Oh,
So you say Grandma brought this in?
I'm just saying, this grandma's fault.
Grandma wanted
This
WCW,
grandma's fault.
Yes.
There's one thing to have a 30-second clip. I wouldn't even say that. A 5-second clip.
If that much, yeah.
That most people thought was boxing as a way to show grandma being funny. There's another thing to be able to say, okay, now watch a guy get hit over the head with a steel chair.
Okay, that's fair. Things advanced a
Yes.
little bit, but I guess my point is that it was introduced in that attraction. How do they not just say, okay, well, what is this if we're going to, have money pulled in for it? I
Also,
guess
just keep in mind that wrestling in the 40s chinged a lot in the 90s. 90s.
Oh, totally.
You talk about the
big
era
time.
of ECW where things were starting to get a little bit more mature.
But but things were really getting big back then, like 80s, 90s. I mean, merchandising was big, and I knew
That's when it
Disney
blew
was
up.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I knew Disney was about
They
merchandising.
were about that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to be like, hey, come over to MGM Studios and watch a guy get busted open with a steel chair.
Boom.
Yeah, let your kids see the proverbial crimson mask.
I mean, it's like bibbity boppity oops. Yeah. I get
Bibbidi
you.
bobbidi.
So,
Bibbity boppity
I was going to say bibbity bobbity ouch.
yeah.
Oh, snap.
So one of Disney's conditions for hosting WCW at MGM Studios, which I thought to be funny, was that Disney wanted the WCW wrestlers not to show up in their own vehicles. Instead, they wanted them to come over on a bus because they thought if WCW wrestlers were wandering through the park, it might scare the children. What? Yes. Well, think about it. What if you're walking through the park and Vader walks right up to you? Or the Road Warriors?
I feel like that's awesome.
You would.
I would.
I would too, but
Yeah, if you're a
So,
boy,
yes.
if you're a boy,
Yes.
you're like, that's awesome. We're assuming that, well, Disney is assuming that, if I'm following this right, that anyone that was a kid wouldn't have followed wrestling back then when it was, I don't know, it was huge.
But Disney, okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah,
we'll address the second part of that in a
That's fair,
second.
that's fair.
They should have built
Okay.
tunnels. That's what they should have done. That's
Because
how
it
you
was in
fix that.
cartoons.
No, 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 no.
You need
It
the
was
tunnels.
toys. It was a lot of stuff back then.
In the 80s, we're talking about
This is 90s, yeah.
early to mid 90s
Yeah.
is where we're talking about now, and wrestling had changed.
Yeah, that's fair. It wasn't no, yeah.
So Disney even took it a step forward by insisting that the windows of the buses or vans that the wrestlers were traveling, and they had to be covered so that guests wouldn't see a group of wrestlers showing up on a bus at MGM Studios.
Okay, well, that makes sense for kayfabe purposes, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think that.
I don't think it had much to do with kayfabe.
I don't think
That's fair,
much to do
too.
with
Disney was caring about the whole kayfabe option. You could have had a heel bus and a babyface bus.
Babyface bus.
You
Oh,
could have
okay.
done that, but they just did not want the Disney theme park audience.
To just see those guys running
Right.
around. Okay.
And more on that later. I'll get to it because I'm gonna cover what it is. I think that you're kind of hinting towards, which is a valid point.
you got me hooked right here in this topic.
Let me guess. Operated by mirrors? Is that the precursor to Magical Express?
Gus was driving the bus.
Okay.
Oh, man.
That's what I thought.
We want your money, but we don't want to see you. So we'll take you in through a bus, slide into a soundstage, all the way to the back of the studio part of the park, where nobody can see unless they go in there.
And that was absolutely 1,000% true, Kirk, because once they were there, the wrestlers were confined to the soundstage area. They were not permitted to leave the soundstage area because, again, Disney didn't want them walking around the park frightening the guests.
Don't ruin the magic.
Yes.
Jeez, it's
Could've built
crazy.
tunnels.
They larger
Here's
than
another
life.
thing. Here's another thing that
All
Disney
right.
did.
All right.
Disney also didn't give the WCW wrestlers any breaks on staying on Disney property. There was no break for the room rates that the wrestlers had to pay or the production crew. They could not stay on Disney property. It wasn't financially feasible. So if they didn't want to stay on Disney property,
Okay, now that sounds like Disney.
That's a load of bullshit.
Yeah, but that
right
is
there.
bull.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
they would have had to pay rack rates in order to stay on Disney property.
But they're performing for a Disney audience essentially, or making
They're
Disney
contract
money.
workers for Disney.
That's so bad. Like,
That's sad.
You saw what John Stamos did in that hot tub. What do you think a bunch of wrestlers would do?
okay,
John Stamos ruined it for all the wrestlers.
well, the wrestlers should freaking pedigree John Stamos then for what he did because.
Come here, you beach boy.
Yeah, come here. Raw! Like, wrestlers don't get too many breaks when they
Right,
do
yeah.
this travel. Like, yo, go ahead. Man, that's wrong. though. I'm just saying that's wrong.
That's tough, man.
That's
So
wrong.
That's
what
not
did
right.
WCW do about it? They did what a lot of us who are looking to save money on our Disney vacation do. They stayed off site at the Marriott Courtyard Suites. And they had barbecues and everything back at the room. They invited their families, and apparently this became like a really big bonding session for them. They actually had a great time.
That's cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
you remember that time at the Marriott?
Remember that time Mickey screwed us?
I loved it.
I couldn't believe it.
192.